Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Manhattan. It's my joy to serve as the minister here. My name is Pastor Isabel Call. Our vision is to be a vibrant, inclusive congregation, widely known as a safe haven and a force for social justice. So we are glad you are here as part of that vision, part of that visioning, and part of that movement toward the vision. Welcome, visitors and newcomers. You can chat with our greeter, Shirley, after the service. And if you're joining us on Zoom, our Zoom host, Kathleen, is available to chat along with many others. If you're here in person and have a joy or a sorrow you'd like to be shared later, you can go ahead and start writing it down on a paper you'll find nearby. And if you're on Zoom, we'll have an opportunity later for you to type it into the chat. Just a couple announcements as we get going. There are some thank you cards in the Allsop Fellowship Hall that I believe Dick, our new board chair, has spread out invitingly for you to sign. So these are for our outgoing board members and for the people involved on the installation task force. So I know the congregation as a whole has deep thanks for all these people, and this is your opportunity to say your individual thanks. So please sign those cards. On Tuesday at 4 p.m., both here in the building and on Zoom, there'll be an opportunity to hear about what's coming up at General Assembly and make your questions known and your opinions known to our delegates who will be voting on behalf of the fellowship. The big vote this year, this is the General Assembly of the Congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association. The big decision this year is whether to change our bylaws with new statements of values as Unitarian Universalists. So in your order of service, you will have seen part of the new draft of the bylaws. This isn't the full thing, but this is one of the important parts. So it's something to consider, and it would be great for you to come ask questions and have your thoughts be known. One last announcement. Please put on your calendar Sunday, June 9th. Here in the morning for a regular service, we will have flower communion. So we'll invite you to bring a flower, and you'll be able to take a flower home. And then in the afternoon, we're going to be having a party at Blue Vista, which is an event venue on Tuttle Creek Lake. So this is going to be great fun. We're inviting the other two congregations that we partner with often. So please put it on your calendar and come party. And now I invite the young at heart, young in body, including Miss Sandy, up for this story of Maisie and Owen.
What should we use?
Yeah, what's a good mic? Will the choir mic pick?
Let's pick up. How far should I be before it's no longer picking up? Oh, she says I gotta get closer.
I think the hand mic is coming your way. Would it be helpful? Yeah, here comes the hand mic. It's on.
I will try to talk softly enough so that it doesn't hurt your ears. Good morning. Today we're going to, in our education class, we're going to talk about welcoming everyone. And this story seemed to be relevant to whatever Isabel is going to talk about today to the grown-ups. And it's relevant to us. It's called Owen, and I would pronounce it Mazee. Mazee. Okay. Dan would pronounce it Mazee. But we're welcoming to everyone, so Mazee works too. It's what?
Swahili, it means an old person.
Means a wise old person, I believe. Yes. Dan would know. What does it look like? It's a story about a hippo and a tortoise. It's a giant tortoise. Do you know how big a giant tortoise can get? Anybody want to demonstrate for me? As big as an elephant? Maybe a baby elephant laying down on the ground. How big does a hippo get to be? Yeah, I read in here it's 6,000 pounds. Is that right? 8,000 pounds. That's pretty big. That's like more than all of those people put together. So this is a story of Mazee and and Owen, and this is where we are in Kansas, and this is a story that takes place way across the ocean here in Kenya. 20 years ago, there was a lot of bad weather, and this is called a pod of hippos, and that's how they lived. They lived all together in the water like that. Have you ever seen a hippo in the water? Almost. They lived in all of that mud and water, and they loved it, except that when the bad weather came 20 years ago, this baby hippo, Owen, who soon became named Owen, he didn't go by Owen among his friends and family, he got stuck. And the people that lived nearby went out to help him because he was stranded all alone. His family, I don't know, washed away. I'm not sure. And it took, look at all these people. It took that many people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, about 40 people to carry a hippo. Could you imagine that? That's a lot of people, a lot of hippo. And it was just a baby. But since it lost its mom and its pod, it's all its people, and they needed to take care of this baby hippo, they decided to take it to some place. Where would you take a baby hippo to take care of it? Your backyard? No? Where would you take it? A zoo? Yeah, well, we'll call it a friendly zoo. They called it an animal sanctuary. It took them a while to get that baby hippo to the animal sanctuary, and when it got there, it was kind of frightened, and they didn't really have a place for hippos, because hippos don't typically go to animal sanctuaries, but there was this place at the animal sanctuary where this animal lived. This is Mazee. Ooh, I heard Mazee again over here. Mazee. What is Mazee? Again, a tortoise, a giant tortoise. Nobody wants to demonstrate how big a giant tortoise might be for me. Come, no one's just jumping up. You want to be a giant tortoise? It's big. It's really big. Well, this giant tortoise was not particularly happy about sharing its quarters. Reptiles, like the tortoise, and hippos aren't exactly known to be friendly to each other. But look what happened. Here's a picture. There's a picture. This one's a little different. Owen, the hippopotamus, started hiding behind Mazee. God, that's hard. He thought it was a big rock, and he just hid behind him. Well, Mazee did not like that at all, so he started walking away. The hippo started following him. Well, the tortoise was really kind of annoyed and walked the other way, and the hippo started following him again. This was not good. It was a kind of annoying. But in the morning, they were all cozied up and sleeping together. And then, even though they're not usually friends in the wild, in nature, what happened? Look, they started playing together. And this hippo, the baby hippo, was kind of sick and getting weak, but the giant tortoise taught it, basically showed it how to eat. And the baby hippo started eating. But did the baby hippo start eating again like a baby hippo? No, the baby hippo started eating like a tortoise. Oh, look, they're all we gotta show this picture. Look at them all cozy, sleeping and snuggling together. They'd become friends. It's only that picture and that picture only. I didn't make a whole bunch of pictures because really that's kind of the message, togetherness. So, science can't really explain why they became friends. But Owen and Mazzei became friends. Mazzei took care of Owen, and in return, Owen actually started caring for Mazzei. They would lick each other's faces gently. Each one could probably crush the other on some level, but they started being kind to each other and took care of each other. So here's the moral. Why what? Does he have spots on him? Yeah, people have spots. Animals have spots too. This is our moral. Our most important friends are sometimes those we least expect. It's a good reason to welcome everyone, isn't it? You think? Anyway, that's the story.
Quite unexpectedly, as I was preparing for this reflection, I came upon one of the deepest and least answerable questions. What is it that makes us human? What makes us different from other animals? Last week we heard from Carl Jung, who understood humans as playing a special role in nature. We are the embodiment of nature's evolution toward consciousness. To be conscious is not particularly interesting, I think, unless it affects the world. What matters about our consciousness, what makes it matter, and not just idea, is that we make conscious choices. We act in conscious responsiveness rather than unconscious reactivity. Making conscious choices is actually redundant because it's not possible to truly choose unless you're awake to the possibilities and to your own personal power and creativity. To respond to the world is to choose to create the world. To be conscious is to be a participant of what is and what is becoming, to be a creator. We might even say to be a part of God. Now, I've certainly heard the argument that we are simply living in the illusion that we have choices, and that there's nothing, no thing we might approximate by calling God. I guess that just leaves us thinking we're conscious, and honestly, that's good enough for me. I'm also not particularly interested in arguing that humans are the only earthlings or the only beings in the universe who are conscious. As I was writing this, I was seeing a bird pecking along a path, and I was thinking, well, maybe that bird is entirely choiceful and is performing his spiritual practice. Perhaps someday I will evolve enough to be able to hear him tell me about it. In the meantime, the meaning of my life feels more accessible and joyful when I set my intention toward becoming more conscious, engaging in the process Jungians call individuation, the lifelong process of becoming the complete human beings we were born to be, waking up to our true selves, our total selves. I talked last week about how we do this by getting to know the constellation of selves who live within us, who might appear to us in dreams as persons with whom we interact and who interact with each other. Sub-personalities with various emotions. And one of the ways I get to know that constellation is to notice the emotions I'm feeling in a given moment. Often, maybe not always, I'm feeling more than one emotion at a time. So I came upon this pretty cool wheel of emotions, Plutchik's wheel of emotions, and those of you in the sanctuary can see a printout of it. Sorry, you have to squint to read the emotions, but they're there. So, what are you feeling right now? Maybe one of these words captures it. You can shout it out if you want, or just say it to yourself. Mm. Interest, curiosity. I have an app on my phone that I've been playing with for the past few months called How We Feel. And it's not a circle like this, but it does have a bunch of different emotions and colors, and I get to choose how I'm feeling at the moment. It's been a really good exercise, because so often I have no idea. I'm not conscious of how I feel. Anais Nin said that we are made up of layers, cells, constellations. We grow sometimes in one dimension and not in another, unevenly. We are mature in one realm, childish in another. How insightful. I definitely feel that. Sometimes I have an inner personality that is so caught up in emotion that she's stuck. Or one that is so caught up in an emotion that he's growing really fast. And that to me sounds like a community where some of us are mature and others are young at heart in a given moment, not necessarily correlated to age. And it sounds like the division or the diversity of society, if humanity does have a responsibility in the evolution of nature to become conscious, then I think we must do it not just individually with our own dream characters, but collectively with the real life characters here at the fellowship or at the farmer's market, or on the school board or the legislature or the folks who work all along the supply and distribution chains of Amazon. We have to wake up together. We are being asked to notice ourselves and each other, and I would say notice the divinity that is flowing between us. We are called to relationships of responsiveness, noticing and respecting emotion, our own and others, rather than reactivity or taking each other for granted. We are called to relationships of care. And that brings us to pluralism, the theme of the month here at UUFM, and one of the 6 values being articulated in the proposed new bylaws of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. Although pluralism was named once in the current version of the bylaws, it was named as something we're grateful to. It wasn't really defined or fleshed out. And so the new version gives us a lot more to go on with pluralism, a Unitarian Universalist description of pluralism. It says this: we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. So I'm actually going to read it again. Since it's the theme of the month, why not? And as you're listening, maybe just listen to one word, maybe one word will stand out to you. I'd invite you to notice your emotions right now, how they're impacted by these words, or maybe not, maybe you've got something else going on. But what are you feeling right now? Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. As a social scientist, I've always been interested in the gradations of various qualities that are held among different people. In a scientific framework, we tend to line people up according to different criteria and see polarities at the ends of the spectrum, or the ends of the line. We might label victim and oppressor, poor, rich, centered, marginalized. We could even refer to this wheel of emotions. Plutchik says the opposites, if you look at the opposite colors or opposite on the circle, they are opposite emotions. So we might put anger at one end of a spectrum and fear at the other end of a spectrum, or joy and sadness, and line ourselves up along these. We could do that. It's not necessarily a bad practice in order to understand a society, or maybe it's a way we could understand kind of a snapshot of our community, how our community feels. But author and group facilitator Gareth Gwynn says that when we relate to these polarities in a reactionary way, we tend to divide ourselves up along those lines and collapse into one pole. So yeah, we can line ourselves up, maybe a political spectrum, liberal to conservative. But then when we relate to that reactively, put ourselves at one pole, we collapse ourselves. We are othering, forgetting that the person we think we are not is actually within us. To relate in a responsive rather than reactionary way, we remember that everyone is inherently worthy. Our value isn't measured by our location on the line. That's really easy in our society when we measure people by income or assets. It's pretty common for people to feel that their worth, their worthiness relates to their net worth. The experience of polarity, she writes, Gareth Gwynn writes, can be one of expansion, flow, contrast, and generative transformation rather than division. She continues, once we reckon with the paradox of how the perceived other is both distinct and a direct reflection of us, then we see ourselves in that mirror. We see everyone and everything as reflecting an aspect of ourself that we get to reclaim. The idea that you are either with us or against us is a limiting lens that perpetuates humanity's suffering. The recognition that you are us, that everyone is us, allows our self-love to humanize others into belonging. Before the service, Dan was talking to me about a minister he really likes, Ron Knapp, right, who talks about oneness. So once we understand a fundamental oneness of the universe, then our self-love can humanize others into belonging. And maybe also others' love of us can humanize us into belonging. So this brings to mind the story of Owen and Mazet, the tortoise and the hippopotamus, animals loving each other across vast differences. And their story is actually in this, there's a book of 47 other unlikely matches. Sandy got this out from the library for us. I'll just read you some examples. I know there's a kitten and a macaw, the Asiatic black bear and the black cat, the duckling and the kookaburra, the leopard and the cow, the white rhino and the billy goat, the rabbit and the guinea pig, the owl and the spaniel. So I don't know if they're humanizing each other. I think they might be doing something even better than that. But their love for each other across the differences humanizes me. And whatever they have is what I mean when I try to talk about pluralism. So we're now going to hear an edited snippet of a conversation from the podcast For the Wild with Dr. Kim Tallbear. She's from the University of Alberta, one of the strongest groups of Indigenous studies scholars in the world, and her research is focused on Indigenous peoples' engagements with science and technology as that engagement serves Indigenous sovereignty. Dr. Tallbear is a citizen of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate in present-day South Dakota. And she and Ayanna Young, who you will hear first, are talking about multiculturalism, which is a word I think we've often used to describe, the joy that we experience when meeting with people who are very different from us, or creatures who are very different from us. But Ayanna Young and Dr. Kim Tallbear are critiquing multiculturalism because the way it's practiced and understood and promoted can be superficial. Multiculturalism, as they understand it, is a melting pot ideal that melts the quote-unquote other into the norm, the American or white or imperial norm. Multiculturalism colonizes and appropriates others rather than respecting them. So the people we're about to hear might say that multiculturalism is sort of like decoration for capitalism, and it's bound up with patriotism that glorifies existing power structures. So it's a intense and important critique, and I encourage you to listen to the full podcast, which covers other provocative topics, which you can find in our virtual order of service. In the snippet we hear now, you can tell that they're deep in conversation. There are a lot of ideas, and Dr. Tallbear speaks quickly. And I decided to include this because I think it's interesting, and I've been wanting to share it with you all. And I also wanted us to experience together what can happen in pluralism, which is that you come upon a conversation that is not about you, that doesn't center you, and it's hard to understand. And so sometimes you just have to listen and feel what you feel and identify the questions that you have. So as you're listening, I encourage you to notice any ideas that you hear or that you have, and also to listen for your own emotions that come up.
I really appreciate how you provide such a thoughtful critique on the multicultural state as nothing more than a mere tolerance, which really solidifies the nation state and liberal settler society. And I also know that for many, the critique of multiculturalism will hit hard because it confronts what so many of us have thought to be enough for far too long. Yet what you situate as an alternative is being in good relation and making kin with Indigenous communities. So I'm wondering if you can share with us how kinship can be an alternative to liberal multiculturalism.
Well, if you're advocating multiculturalism, incorporation into whose project? Just the assumption that the U.S. or Canadian project are the good project. We didn't ask to be incorporated into you all. And African people were kidnapped, and brought over and forced into this kind of citizenship project as well eventually. And then we're all supposed to clamor for acceptance and belonging and incorporation into this. Give me a break. Meanwhile, you've got this sort of, especially in the case of the U.S., this militaristic, violent, contaminating state going around the world, killing people, producing environmental conditions that are decimating non-human populations. And so the civilizational project of the state is inherently violent, and multiculturalism is not going to get us out of that. What? We want to rainbow up the U.S. militaristic empire? That doesn't sound great to me. It doesn't sound great to a lot of people around the world, as inclusive as you might get within the US. That's excluding a whole lot of people, and it's, of course, on the backs of a lot of non-human relatives. So I'm a critic of patriotism in all of its forms. Your love should not be dedicated to the nation state. It should be dedicated to your relatives. And if you are in favor of patriotism to the US, you are acting against the planet. You are acting against all of your relations. And I don't think that's a very ethical stance to take. So I don't embrace multiculturalism. I just don't. Now, I realize there are pragmatic, people will say, well, there's a pragmatic kind of argument one can make. Sure, you go ahead and do that. But there's also this kind of macro level argument that some of the rest of us are also attempting to make. So my allegiance is to the planet, right? And again, that's within a context of I'm better working in a particular location for sure. But I just can't have allegiance to a nation state. I can't, because it just excludes too many people. And so I think multiculturalism is still kind of not examining the allegiance to the nation state. And
Those of you in the room, were you able to hear much of that? Oh, some people fairly well. Okay. So what are you feeling? I'll just ask you to ask yourself, what are you feeling? If you're feeling activated by any of the ideas, can that be an experience of expansion, flow, contrast, and generative transformation rather than division? And what questions do you have? If Dr. Tallbear were here, what question might you ask her? In the spirit of the UU definition of pluralism, see if you have a question, not an opinion, just a question. And we'll have an opportunity in a few minutes for your thoughts and opinions, but for now, I'll just give you a few breaths to quietly listen to yourself. What is your question of this scholar about pluralism and multiculturalism? The question I have that Ayana Young posed and that Dr. Tallbear didn't answer directly is how kinship can be an alternative to toxic multiculturalism. You mentioned, I would say to her, that our love should be dedicated to our relatives and not the nation state. How can I learn to be kin to everyone? A Unitarian Universalist definition of pluralism goes beyond multiculturalism. We make promises or covenants. We don't just sort of say we want to hang out with people who are different and tolerate the difference. I think we seek kinship by making promises with others. Not because we're trying to control things, the relationship or the other people, but because we're trying to remember to stay conscious. And one thing I like about the new bylaws proposed is that they don't just name and define our values, like pluralism. We make promises to practice them. In the case of pluralism, we covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. I don't know, is that kinship to promise to learn from one another like siblings or like grandchildren and grandparents. I don't know. We don't have to make explicit promises in order to be family. I think most of us don't. We just end up in family. But it helps me, especially as I am learning to build a chosen family of people all around the world. I make little promises, like I'm gonna call you next week. And they make a promise, yeah, I'm gonna answer the phone. And if we don't connect, we'll follow up. Yeah, these promises help me stay conscious of my commitments. It helps me remember my intentions if I know that you know what they are. It helps me feel like I belong when we give word to our shared intentions and invite each other to bring them back to our consciousness when we forget. So yeah, this is my answer to how I practice kinship as a Unitarian Universalist. And I would really like to know more from Dr. Tallbearer about how she practices kinship, or how she would recommend somebody like me living on this land to practice kinship. So I think my question to start our conversation here, we have about 10 minutes, is how do you practice kinship? And you're also welcome to share about anything else that came up this morning. Here comes the mic. Yeah, I need the mic so I can hear you, but also the people on Zoom need it so they can hear you.
Great, thanks so much. Oh, that sounds good. Hello.
Hello.
Closer, all
Lovely.
right. That's amazing. I am concerned that we're talking about this. When I look around here, there is a Black gentleman who has been attending, in the relatively few times that I've come here. How is it that this congregation has not engaged with some of the very rich and wonderful Black and also very religious organizations that meet on Sundays and have a very different point of view from our own?
It's a good question.
And why do I not see more people of other ethnicities here? And I'm relatively new this time around to this congregation. I also might mention that my best friend in the world lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and she and her husband have been long-term members of that particular Unitarian church there. And I think it would be quite interesting to start engaging with that community to some degree. I mean,
Yeah.
that's totally different from the whole racial issue, but it does mean reaching out to someone who bears a lot of similarities to this congregation. Certainly not Black, but so I'm sort of bringing up both of those points.
Thank you. So building bridges.
Kathy Swenson. I grew up where I went to school during the time that we were putting multiculturalism up there in our goals for education. And I took a class on multicultural education and multicultural literature. And my feelings about the word multicultural, I always thought it was a good word. I liked that word because at the time, there wasn't much emphasis on making sure that in the classroom you had a variety of books and a variety of people represented from all over the world. So my definition of multiculturalism is colored by that, or comes from that perspective. So I'm trying to work through my thoughts of what this person's definition of multiculturalism is. So if any other people have, just kind of wondering about it. I can't quite put my head around it yet.
Yeah, it sounds like multiculturalism has helped you have better experiences of the world and you've seen it help young people.
So Lauren Clement is my name, and I'm with Kathy. I taught at K-State for 40 years, and my seminar classes, I would talk about the theory, or with my students talk about the theory of landscape architecture, but what comes to my mind right now is the motivations of the teachers. And no matter what age group you're dealing with, that instructor may have an incredibly broad, inclusive point of view that comes through with the topic of multiculturalism, and may not be politically driven at all, just human love and appreciation for people learning together. But another instructor may have some big agenda that really gets interpreted as blending or forcing people to conform, which leads to that nation state worry, I think, and not having allegiance to the nation state. But we need a nation state in this country if we're going to protect everybody from the realities of the world. So if you push to the extreme of I can't give allegiance to a nation state because I'm a global citizen, that brings up to my mind the problem of theory versus practice, and idealism versus pragmatism or reality-based decision-making. You have to protect yourself. You have to remain healthy, safe, and have welfare as a nation to do the right thing for the world.
So
There's a real dilemma there.
it sounds like this conversation that you listened in on, critiquing the alignment of multiculturalism with the nation state brought up your need for security and feelings and your desire for everybody to be safe. So fear for your own and others' safety. Yeah.
So I absolutely adore both of the individuals who were on that video. And I appreciate so much how that conversation stirred some uncomfortableness, uncomfortability, whatever you want to call it, in a lot of people, because that's how we grow. And as someone who is, multi-ethnic myself, and there was the question of what is kinship versus multiculturalism. So if you think of kinship as, somebody that you are kin with, when something bad happens to them, you feel it as though it's happening to you. And you care about it on so much of a deeper level. It's not just simply compassion for somebody and feeling sympathy for somebody. It's almost as if it's happening to you. So like, for example, she talked about our non-human relatives, meaning the animals and other populations that inhabit this planet versus us. When we are decimating those populations, if we look at them from a kinship point of view, that is our loss. That is our sister, our brother, our cousin who are having horrific things happening to them versus an other entity that we're like, oh, that's horrible. Oh, it's a very personal thing. We internalize what happens to these other members of our family that inhabit this planet. Multiculturalism is very much the same. When we say multiculturalism, we accept other cultures into our midst, but the kinship brings it to a level that we identify, like internalize the things that have happened to them. And we can have other cultures that have been, had horrible things happen to them. For example, the African population who was kidnapped and brought over here, they still to this day face challenges that other groups do not face. And just to accept them into our midst without also internalizing what has happened to them historically, it doesn't lend itself to a full integration and kinship relationship.
Thank you. I see Pat has a hand up, and while Shirley's coming, I wonder if there's anyone on Zoom who would like to share. I see Dan making it possible for us to see you and hear you. Feel free to unmute and say something if you'd like. Okay, so I hand it to Renee.
Hi. Oh, so, okay. So, yeah, that was, I feel like it's not necessarily saying that multiculturalism in broad strokes is bad. It's just that it's insufficient, right? It's just not enough that's going to take us to a place where we're treating each other in the world in a better way. I just kind of wanted to share some feelings about patriotism because I grew up with a very, very patriotic father and in a very patriotic community, and you know, you stand up and you say the national anthem and proud to be American, you sing those songs and stuff like that. And I never understood it or felt connection with the concept because I'm proud to be born in the US, and it just sort of felt like nobody control. Proud to me is like something that you've done or achievement, right? Like some sort of like, I don't have any control over where I'm born or what nation state, you know, I just never felt that connection. So it's interesting because it seems like it can be a powerful motivator for some people, and it's like those connectors aren't there in my brain for it to interface with. So I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but I've never emotionally connected with that. But there's something interesting there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wonder if learning to sympathize or understand how other people feel patriotism might give you ahas. Yeah, and I think we'll hear from Pat, and then we'll and Christy, Pat and Christy, and then we'll move into singing.
Okay, yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for speaking up about the multicultural, interracial group that we may or may not have at our fellowship. And and that's always been a question of mine. And we've had a few, Ken and I have been here since 1987, and there have been other races here. But they move or something happens, and it doesn't happen very often. And it's always been a question in my mind, and I think what's come up lately that has helped me is the fact that we have our very active racial justice committee, and we've read and we've done things, and we're trying to reach out more. And I think that reaching out is a key thing, that whether we do it as a congregation or individually or as a group like our racial justice group, it takes all of that, and the kinship coming from that, reaching out, from associating with each other on that reaching out, helps that, I think, helps those people and our people to get together.
Thank you, Pat. I'll say as you pass the mic to Christy that one of the main things we've also been doing on the racial justice team is reaching in, reading these books so that we can understand better our own culture or our own inheritances of ideas and habits, which is also very important for being people that others want to be kin with.
And
Isabel, we have 2 people on Zoom that would like to speak if it fits in.
Well, we're getting on toward noon here. I think it would be good to hear from folks. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, Katie?
Yeah, just unmute and go ahead and speak.
Yeah, so I've been reading Soul Boom by Rainn Wilson, as recommended by Karen in the racial justice team. And Wilson, the chapter I read recently, he points out that measured patriotism is okay. It's expected to have some pride in your country. That is what kind of holds it together. And that's how we have our armed services. But then it's when people take it too far and use it to justify overlooking any wrongs done by the country, that a country can do no wrong, that idea, that's kind of where it gets dangerous.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds like polarizing, like collapsing into one end of the pole. Yeah, thank you, Katie. Somebody else on Zoom wanted to share? Mickey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how we can make others, including some of the university educators, become more aware of the misleading concept of multiculturalism without being confrontational. I've noticed that even some of the university events are very superficial, like serving teas from all over the world. So I'm looking for a suggestion.
Yeah, thank you. Let's talk more. I wonder if there's wisdom in this community about how we build bridges, make sweet harmony, while also having the difficult conversations. Christy, would you like to share? Here, try it now.
is it on now?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm also really curious about what Dr. Tallbear was saying about kinship and eager to learn more. But it occurred to me, and it kind of came as a question, what might I need to unlearn about kinship, kind of old understandings of kinship that are actually bound up with nation states and patriotism? What would I need to unlearn in order to kind of make way for a new understanding of kinship?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just say to close the conversation, if anyone's interested in the podcast that's linked, it's about family and the creation of family, and how it is that norms of marriage in particular came to this country and colonized the country. And so, yeah, how might we have different ideas about family than those that were a part of the kind of imperial colonizing agenda? It's the For the Wild podcast, and if you look at the email that went out about this service, you can find a link to it there. Thank you all for this rich conversation.